and to each other. And I think moving in the world, even as adults, and this goes into that mental, emotional space, right? Moving in the world with this core sense of belonging somewhere, even hopefully, ideally, as Brene Brown says, to ourselves, belonging to ourselves, which she borrows from Maya Angelou, is the ultimate goal. But most of us struggle to get there. So we look for groups and people to belong to. And it's just such a powerful thing when we can move through the world feeling like we belong. And we're not seeking belonging everywhere we go. And I think that's one of the reasons why it can be so powerful.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't. And we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hersh. And if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes. My guests today on Truth Tastes Funny are Jeff and Liz Spitzer. They have a company called Head Heart Health, and they take a holistic approach encompassing physical and emotional health. And Jeff touches on the physical with a little bit elements of the emotional. Liz focuses on the mental, also with elements of the emotional, but you put these two together and you have hopefully total physical and emotional health. And we're going to use myself as a bellwether and see if by the end of our conversation, we can reverse any negative trends and make sure that I'm both physically and emotionally well.
Well, let's not set the bar too high here, Hersh. Come on.
Yeah.
Kidding.
I don't think we're in danger of setting it too low for me because we're starting at a baseline of, I don't know. I was reading the intro to my forthcoming book, and I mentioned in the acknowledgments that I thanked all the people who had raised me from a baby to an adult, which I have achieved at 57 years of age, that I consider myself finally an adult. But
congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's my emotional birthday.
Hopefully the adolescent period didn't last for 40 years, but
well, I don't know. I was not paying attention because I was immature. Well, welcome guys to the show. It is wonderful to have you both. Why don't we begin with how it is that you came together to pool your skill sets and to do what each of you do work together holistically. Just give us a little background.
Can I tell this story?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Let's see, how far back do we want to go? But
I'm going to start with way back when our kids were younger. There was this moment I had that I think a lot of wives or even husbands would relate to, in which I was so tired of doing so much around the house that I went on strike for a whole week. I was like, I'm not doing a thing. I'm not lifting a hand. And you know what I was waiting for? I was waiting to see if people noticed. And what I was, people like my kids and my husband.
Yeah.
I was waiting for somebody to say something to the effect of, hey, we noticed what you're not doing. We really appreciate you and everything that you do around the house for us. That might be a big ask a lot of times from our families. And then he noticed that something was off, but he was focused on leaving and packing for a business trip. And so he just let me be in my funky stew for whatever reason. And then one day I kind of had this all of this angst is about not feeling appreciated. And I talked to him about it while he was on his business trip, and he gave me some words of affirmation. And the next day I was sweeping the house and doing, who do I think of? Mary Poppins. I was just doing everything. And it made me think about what was the key difference between being Mary Poppins and being on the couch with
Cinderella.
Yeah. And it was that appreciation. So in a moment of inspiration, I took a dry erase board, wiped it clean, and wrote appreciation board on the top of it and stuck it back on the fridge. Didn't tell anybody about what my purpose was what my thought was, but they adapted to it really, really well, just instinctively knew what the purpose of that was. Anyhow, we began to see changes in our house. People related better together. They were laughing more. We'd ask the kids to do something. They were more willing to do it. So
And
we're
this is
talking
from, just to clarify, this is from writing words of affirmation to each other on that appreciation
on the
board.
appreciation board.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I was talking to Jeff about like, imagine if more families had this. Imagine if more people had this. And he said, I like it. Let's do it. So then he contacted China. We had 1,000 appreciation boards made. And that's the start of our business. And we got confused about how it was going to be because I was instinctively moving into like this coaching kind of space with the product, and Jeff was focused on a product oriented business.
Yeah.
Well, I
Move
think
the product.
many couples, I think, who build a business together would be able to relate to what we had in our lives, which is it kind of ultimately came down to business or marriage. And I chose, because for me, this business was all about me, right? I put my identity in the business. And so if the business wasn't succeeding, I wasn't succeeding. So it was a really hard choice, but I made the choice of the marriage and I stepped back. Life just kind of helped coach me along and bring things into my path. And I became a first aid mental health trainer. I also became a trainer in other things. And I went back to school and I did all this stuff. And then I said, what if we bring, oh, and he went to coaching and then health coaching. He did that on his own. And then we went to life coaching school together. And then one day we were just like, what if we brought the business back, but we changed it from a product into a service oriented? And we examined how do we keep the logo. And one day after iterations and arguments, it was just like, Head Heart Health. And that's not what we're doing. And that's how it was born.
So the original concept was really just the whiteboards.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
the thing was it's a way of showing mutual appreciation. You share messages on the board. The family shows appreciation for one another. Everybody's happier in their role. That was the initial thing. Now,
Yep.
Jeff, what were you doing professionally at that time, at that moment where you were going on that trip? What was your work?
My day job in market research. So I worked in market research for, over 20 years. And
Right.
so I was going on a client visit to go, do the client facing
Right.
thing. And anyway, that's where I was going at that time. The thing about this business is that while it started as this product-based business and it morphed over time, as we just covered, is that, like Liz said, I was very focused on moving the product. She was very focused on servicing people. So we had this conflict, and it was in this conflict that we decided we got to make a choice. But at the same time, those who had the board had the same experiences we had in our house, where there's just something about writing down your appreciation. You can say, hey, honey, I appreciate you so much, which is good. But there's something extra when you take the time to write it, because then it's not just there in that moment, it's there later to see. You don't even have to be in the same house. You could, I was away, she could have wrote something on the board that I'd see when I got back, sort of a thing. And so we were blending our families at this time. We both had kids from a prior marriage, and it was tough. And this was a way for the kids to acknowledge each other, and it really helped bring them together. So we still really loved the idea. We found a manufacturer in China that made, thousands of these boards for us. We just had so much conflict in like what avenue we were going to go in selling them that we eventually we still have a lot of the product and we still use it, but now we use it in different ways. She'll introduce it in her trainings when she's talking about, gratitude and appreciation. I'll do the same in my health coaching side of the business, because gratitude and appreciation, not just for other people, but for yourself, is so important. And so I'll have people like write appreciations to themselves on their board, things like that. So we still use it. We just don't try to sell it as a standalone product anymore.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And you're actually doing the, service oriented, actually doing the work, but you have a natural segue into this product. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
the selling the product, it would seem, would become very transactional in a way,
Yeah.
you know, and there's a lot of widgets and things to, you know, but it makes total sense to me. We have I guess it's a cow. It's just a cow, three-dimensional kind of stand thing, but it's chalk, you know, it's blackboard. So you
Okay.
can write on it, you know, whatever you want. And we got in the habit of writing when it's somebody's birthday, when it's a holiday, when it's a new season. And it becomes like a message board for the family, or a welcome
Mhm.
board for people who come in the kitchen and see that there's something new or something going on. And we do have a whiteboard on our fridge, but that's mostly where my wife takes the time to plan out meals.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I try to use if she goes away, I use the same board from last week and don't change anything, and just kind of like, I'm like, okay, try to erase it without erasing the whole thing so we can still have the pizza on Tuesday, and it's just easier. You know, that's a thing that happens. It's like keeping the home running
Exactly.
is, you know, you have with two careers and, you know, kids and
Mhm.
all this stuff, it does become very like a thankless, it's a thankless task. I think, you know, have you seen that show The Bear, about the
Yes.
restaurant
Yes.
business?
That was a little activating for me.
Oh,
That's a whole different story, but there's one episode where we didn't talk for 2 or 3 days because he wasn't getting why I was so activated. I was like,
It was
they should give a trigger warning on this show. And
the seven
yeah,
dishes, the home holiday. I think it was
oh
Christmas or
wow. Oh
yeah,
my
Thanksgiving or
God. That's a
that one.
that's a
Yeah,
powerful
it
episode. I mean,
yeah.
was
that
very
packs a
much.
wallop. But
It was beside myself with that one.
but my wife and I will say that we'll use that terminology. Like, she'll say, "Please and thank you, chef. Take out the garbage."
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, I was gonna say we
So
call each other chef.
yeah, we call each other chef. Thank you, chef. Chef. And it's funny, but it does take on that assembly line, you know, that's that typical thing, getting the
Yeah.
lunches, doing the thing. And
Yep.
it's easy to disappear,
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
what, you know, for either parent, spouse, whatever, to just disappear into tasks. Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you going to say,
One of
Liz?
the, well, I was going to share a story from a kid's perspective about the power of being recognized individually within the family unit. So one of the powerful practices about the appreciation board is one, it's a board uniquely designed or uniquely set aside for only positive communication, right? So you don't make it become a grocery list
Right.
or
Right.
anything else like that, because what happens is if you write something like that and the brain goes, you get a little serotonin and dopamine and a little, right? And then, oh, it's just milk and eggs and cheese. It's then the board loses its power, if you will, its influence.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But for children, so I always caution adults, like, don't let it become a task list. And for children, I'll never forget this story in which we picked up these two kids from the airport because they were going to stay with us overnight
Mhm.
to go to Hawaii and travel there. And we're just chatting in the kitchen with the kids, we're hanging out and we're all just kind of dispersed in the common room. And at one point, the daughter says, she goes, "How are you guys so cool? Like, I love this family. I love this family. Like, what have you done?" She was really curious, like, what makes you what you are?
Hmm.
I didn't like, I started to come up with an answer, right? Like, I'm the adult in a room and I'm like, hey, let me have the answers for you. And I watched with stunned awe as I'm going to start crying, as his kids and my kids pointed all simultaneously at the appreciation board and said, because of that.
Wow.
And I just was like, I had no words, and part of it was because what they saw was that I belong. We have our differences. We don't get along all the time. I feel like so and so takes up my shampoo in the shower and doesn't respect me, or so and so is using my razor, or so and so gets more parent differential than I do most of the times, and blah 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 blah, that kind of stuff. But they ultimately felt like they belonged to us
Yeah.
and to each other. And I think moving in the world, even as adults, and this goes into that mental emotional space, right? Moving in the world with this core sense of belonging somewhere, even hopefully, ideally, as Brene Brown says, to ourselves, belonging to ourselves, which she borrows from Maya Angelou, is the ultimate goal. But most of us struggle to get there. So we look for groups and people to belong to. And it's just such a powerful thing when we can move through the world feeling like we belong. And we're not seeking belonging everywhere we go. And I think that's one of the reasons why it can be so powerful. So I
Yeah.
got a little enthusiastic there. Could you hear it in my voice?
Yes, I hear it, and I think it's wonderful. I had this question when we spoke a while ago, where I think it would be helpful for the audience to distinguish a little bit between emotional health and mental health.
Sure. So I'll cover that real quick, and then I'd like Jeff to add how the physical part of that influences the mental and the emotional, if that's okay.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay. So in the mental, we got to think of one of the key differences that I've heard a lot of scientists kind of like reiterate a time or two over and over is that the mind and the brain are two different things. So if we can think the mind and the brain, think of them as two different things. So the mind would encompass our thoughts. They encompass the sense of consciousness that we have about ourselves and the unconsciousness, if you will, right? The brain is, think of it as a machine. It has electrical impulses that drive synapses and dendrites and chemicals and all of that kind of stuff. And so there are things that occur to the machine. So it's going to be things like the environment feels hot and clammy. So that sends receptor information to our spinal cord, which goes to our brainstem, to our brain, and our brain functions as a machine and goes, well, how do I soothe my body so I don't overheat? There, those electrochemical and synapse reactions and neurotransmitters and all of that influence how our physiological being can exist in the world, as well as our emotional interpretations. Now, in psychology, there's this beautiful dance that's kind of like the chicken or the egg thing, which is, do emotions influence the brain or does the brain influence emotion? And they're kind of really intricately intertwined. But one of the things I'm learning in neurofeedback, which is something I'm training, which we had talked about briefly. So in my training, I'm learning that if we can adjust the electrical chemical patterns of the brain and they're in the neurotransmitters and somewhat, we can also influence the emotional and physical experience of the world.
Oh, wow.
And how do you do that?
We're not going to talk about neurofeedback right now. But one of the cool things that I'm learning and I'm going to seek more to dive into is how can I help people do for themselves what neurofeedback can do for them. So the thing about neurofeedback is it just happens a lot faster and sometimes it is the thing that people need in order to make what they do already more effective. But breathing is something that we can do that changes our brain state. Exercise is something that we can do that changes our brain state. Quick thing I learned yesterday in my college course is that when we exercise for greater than 30 minutes a day at more moderate or more, we enlarge our hippocampus and our prefrontal cortex. These areas of our brain get bigger. We do that simply by exercising. So, see, we have the ability to change our brain through physical activity. And I'll let Jeff talk more about that.
Yes, which is an awesome segue into Jeff's commentary on the physical.
I'm going to be way less scientific than Liz just was.
Okay.
So she alluded to this debate that we have, and not just us, but in the broader field of the chicken and the egg. Do thoughts influence feelings or do feelings influence thoughts? And in the coaching work that I do, I really help clients see how their thoughts are influencing how they feel. So if you can, because what happens for so many of us is that we get locked into these negative thought patterns. We get self-critical. We get, we start to see all the things that are wrong in our environment, which makes sense given our evolution. We needed to be aware of threats in our environment to be safe, but we don't have those same threats anymore. We're still hardwired to look for the negative side and inside. So we'll say, the perfect example. Somebody wants to lose weight, new year, New Year's resolution. This is the year I'm going to do it. January 1st, I'm going to be in the gym. I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week. I'm going to cut out all the junk food. I'm going to eat only healthy stuff. And, maybe by January 5th or 6th, they've sort of laxed on their diet. The gym isn't so fun. They start to fall back and then they start to beat themselves up. They're like, here I go again. I failed again.
Yeah.
And what that does is that when they start thinking like that, it makes them feel like a failure. Here's the body language. I'm a victim to myself. I'm a victim to the circumstances. I just can't seem to do it no matter what I try. And so when you start feeling that way, what does that lead to in your actions? You don't go to the gym. You don't eat healthy. You don't follow through on these things. You start to take this road that is not empowering. Where if you can interrupt that pattern by interrupting the thoughts and saying, hey, look, I went to the gym. I said I was going to go to the gym 5 days. I went 0 last week. All last year, I never stepped foot inside the gym, but I started this year. I went 3 days. I didn't go all 5, but I went 3. That's a huge improvement. I didn't cut out all my junk food, but I cut out most of it. What a huge improvement. So if you just reframe it and you start to think about it differently, it's more empowering, you feel better, and therefore your actions lead to more sustainable, more, self-reinforcing results. And so that's what I really work with my clients on.
Yeah. And I love that idea of focusing on the positive, striving to improve constantly rather than chronicling our failures.
Yes.
That and in fitness, it requires a constant adjustment. It's like
Yes.
I couldn't go to the gym this morning because I had to take my daughter to camp and all of this and whatever goes on. And then if I look at it like I missed today, I'll beat myself up about it. Possibly if I say, well, I'm able to go 3 other times this week, that feels much stronger, but it's all a matter of perspective. It's all a matter of, am I improving overall over time? And with fitness and with emotional health, I think we're always on a time-based trajectory where we're doing better or falling back over time. There is no there. We're messy. We're messy humans with myriad challenges. I guess that's what the show is about. Truth tastes funny. We're trying to survive in a world that doesn't provide easy answers. Liz, in terms of all you've done and are doing to understand science and to learn more and more, what is your feeling about aging as we look at all the different things that can happen, and I'm looking at family members who age differently. What are some prescriptive things that we can do? If people are in middle age, people are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, what can be done at that time?
So well, I'm chuckling because we had a conversation this morning about this. I approached him. I said, hey, as a health coach, what would you share with a client who has these concerns? Because they're my own personal concerns and they have to do with aging. And he kind of said, there's parts of that you're just going to have to live with. It's going to be what it is.
Right.
So I could, talk about that, and that is more on the physical side. But I want to be clear first that I'm answering the question you want. When you ask me this question, are you asking if I can look at it mentally, emotionally, or are you curious?
I think where I was going was that given that there are neurological probabilities,
Yeah.
right? And there's only so much you can do
Mhm.
genetically, whatever it might be, emotionally handling the evolutionary process of aging and all of that. So I feel like it's intertwined. Like how much is about attitude, how much is about how I look at how I'm aging. It's not about me per se. I'm just talking about observing,
Mm.
people and wondering how much is in their power to control their mental health, their neurological health versus because I have Crohn's, so I always you know recognize that there's a huge impact of stress, emotion, which obviously is tied to the psychological. So psychologically, I can have a good influence on my intestinal health, right?
Mhm.
How much can be done on the mind and brain part of the body would probably have been a little bit better question, but
It's actually thank you for clarifying and sharing. It helps me kind of focus in on the subject of what I would say a little bit. First, I want to say to you and to anyone who's listening, I am not an expert. I am a student. I am a student of life. I am a student of learning. I believe also that we get information from the past, we get information from today, and that in 10 years from now, new research from neuroscience and other fields are going to change the things that we're saying today. So I would encourage people to try to stay on top of the most recent evidence from research because, there's things that we look back on and we go, oh, they didn't say that. They didn't encourage people to do that. Like the group grapefruit diet was a good thing to do. Right now, evidence-based research says no, actually, that can put your body into a starving man mentality, and you actually hold on to weight, which is worse for you, right? So there's research that helps. With all of that said, there's a couple of things that I'm going to try to pull in from what I've learned. First, about the brain. So, in learning about neurofeedback and taking the neuroanatomy class, I learned about these things that I like to call the cleaners of our brain. And I like to think of them as the maids. They're called the microglia. They move through our brain, and their job to some degree is to clean the debris and the toxins and all of that stuff and keep our brain as healthy as possible. They all have their own processes. The way I like to describe it is let's imagine the maid is going through your brain and they're using bleach, or they're using Lysol or so that microglia is like, this is what I have and this is effective, so it's working. But it's also a byproduct, could be toxic itself. So when we do something as simple as exercising and doing low to moderate, getting our lungs moving, getting some oxygen and getting some of that stress tolerance, not high stress, but some stress tolerance in there, we we adapt and change that microglia. We give them a tool of non-toxic brain cleaners. So now they're working to earth friendly, plant based, and when they're cleaning our brain, they're not releasing their own byproducts that are just as detrimental. It's been shown that when our microglia are, I might even be saying that wrong. Somebody's probably listening going, you're pronouncing it wrong.
well, not many people who know the pronunciation of it. Most people
So,
are like, yeah, that sounds right.
yeah, that sounds good. I like where she's going with this. That when we have increased microglia and they're doing a good job using the good cleaners, we are less likely to have the risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and dementia because it's getting rid of the brain debris faster. We also have another awesome, powerful little cell in our brain called astrocytes. I love these little guys. So
Hmm.
these astrocytes are like really important to like dendrite communication, neuron health, and all of this. Guess what also happens to make astrocytes better and more? Exercise. So there's a reason our bodies are developed to move. And it's, we have to also, I think, I was listening to a really good video yesterday by Kelly Doginal, Doniglal. She's a researcher. And she was saying that we often think of exercise as something that we have to separate from our everyday life. But when you bend down to take the trash out, your glutes don't know that that's
Yeah.
not exercise, right? When you bend down to squat on, excuse my language, when you bend down to squat on a toilet, your quads and your butt don't know that you're just going to the bathroom. They think they're going into a squat, right? So there's ways that we move that we don't even think of as exercise. And so she was saying in her video, think of, just begin to realize what you do and incorporate more of that into your life. For the emotional, it's true that as our brain matter changes as we age, we do struggle with more negative thinking. The ease of thinking more negatively and seeing the world in a more negative view is very much an easier thing to do, and it takes a lot of effort to think opposite of that. What I've observed when I did a speaking tour for the Rotary clubs in our area, what I observed is that the happiest people were the ones who stayed connected to peers. So they got involved in the Rotary Club, or they were involved in Optimist Club or the Lions Club or a bowling club, or my dad really loves international trucks, and so he's involved in the International Scouters Club, and my parents are both very involved in their church. What's important about these is that you get that social skill that our brain needs to keep sharp about when I read that little crinkle in the corner of your eye, I have to evaluate what that means. We're utilizing our brains in all the different parts. That's like our temporal lobe right there, right?
Yeah.
As well as our occipital. And so these things are very valuable. So I would summarize exercise is really important at all stages of our life, and also being social. And being online is not the same. There's something I haven't tested this or asked or researched on this, but I really believe that the brain perceives facial experience differently online than it does in person. I've
Totally.
spoken to
Yeah.
so many people who are like, I didn't even recognize you because they'd only met the person online.
Yeah.
But then when they meet in person, their brain doesn't connect that who they're standing in front of is equal to the person that they saw online because of the way it was encoded.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've felt that way. That there were people who during the pandemic, I met them during the pandemic online in communities and masterminds and so forth, and then meeting them in person. It was just a completely disorienting experience for a while and then once I know them, going back to seeing them online becomes a different perspective now. Now I perceive them differently because I know the whole picture. And
Yep.
it's very interesting. That's a very interesting area in and of itself. There are so many things that we could talk about. I would like, Jeff, if you know what I like to do is I kind of give the guest the last word in terms of a message for the audience. And Jeff, if you want to give and first of all, tell us where people can find you. So give us that information and then share a little bit of advice or words of encouragement to our audience.
So you can find us on our website, super easy, myh3h.com. I also post a lot of my coaching wisdom, if you will, on Facebook, Jeff Spitzer 1970. You can find me there. And the thing that I would love to impart on people is that people get stuck. they can get stuck and start to settle for things in life. Like, you know what? I primarily work with people on weight loss. It's not my focus, it's just more of what people come to me for. And I don't focus necessarily specifically on helping them lose weight, but on establishing healthy habits that will result in weight loss, if that makes sense. So establishing a healthy lifestyle, doing it incrementally one step at a time. And we start to get to a point in our life where we've, like I said a little bit ago with the New Year's Day example of, I'm going to change everything. When I fail, why try? And we do that enough times that we start to say, well, this is just how life is for me. I'm doomed to, whatever, carry an extra 80 pounds. I'm doomed to not go any further in my career. I'm doomed to have a lousy relationship or whatever it is.
And to make it more personal, Hersh, I'm doomed to live with this disease for forever and the effects of it, right? That can be very limiting as far as emotional mental health too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what I would like to impart on people is that if they just start slow, change one thing at a time, baby steps, super simple baby steps in the direction you want to go. If you're trying to lose 80 pounds, don't try to lose 80 pounds this week because you're probably not exercising regularly. You're probably got a lot of things in your diet that you can change. Start by, like as Liz's example, your body doesn't know you're going to the bathroom when you're squatting any different than when you're like doing physical squats, when you're exercising. So finding ways to get little bits of movement into your life if you're not exercising at all. Maybe you start by, while you're brewing your coffee, you do a couple of standing squats. You do one push-up, one jumping jack. Just start somewhere. If you're trying to eat better and you eat fast food 3 days a week, maybe shoot for eating it 2 days this week. Do that for a couple weeks, then reduce it to 1 day. Super slow changes. You don't have to change everything all at once. In fact, you're probably going to fail if you try to do that. If you take slow incremental changes that you can sustain over the long term, you will get where you want to go. And so to anybody who's feeling stuck, anybody who's feeling like they can't have anything better for themselves, if they just slow down, start to interrupt those negative thought patterns and focus on what they can do and do them slowly and incrementally, you can absolutely get where you want to go.
Hersh, may I add something?
Yes.
It'll be real brief. So to support Jeff and something that you had said earlier, what I would add to what you've said to people who are listening is think about, borrowing from James Clear, think about just making 1% difference in the day. Focusing on by the time I go to bed, I just want to do something 1% better. And maybe if living with a chronic condition, maybe the 1% is I'm not going to let myself get beat today emotionally. Or when something doesn't go our way, my 1% better is not reacting. I'm going to take a deep breath. 1% better, right? And so when Jeff talks about these micro steps, he's essentially encouraging people to look at what can I do 1% better today?
Yeah.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.